Shrek the Third for the Xbox 360, PS2, and PSP is a 3D beat-em-up. There are a lot of common tropes that are associated with 3D beat-em-ups, and Shrek doesn't do very much to differentiate from those. It does have a standard light and heavy attack system, though you may not even notice the heavy attacks are there. Other incredibly basic principles of beat-em-up game design are also present. For example, it's better to fight on the outside of a group of enemies than in the center of them. This is not something I would praise Shrek the Third for, certainly, because it's so orthodox. It's basically the very bare minimum you would need to include player orientation as a design component in your beat-em-up. And it's not as though this is bad design by itself just because it's orthodox, but you need other mechanics and design to work with it for it to become something special. Staying on the outside of a group of enemies could actually be really interesting and challenging if the enemies had unique attack patterns and movements, which forced you to pay closer attention to where you were standing and made you have to work to corral the enemies, but instead they all just kinda bunched together. Everything about Shrek the Third's design is basic like this. Nothing about it stands out, so there's no design to pick up the slack for all the other average design. As was just stated, tinkering with enemy movement and attacks is a great way to make the player orientation design stand out more, but there's so much more that could be done to elevate Shrek above average status. For example, the basic combos at your disposal are also incredibly basic and boring, but this could easily have been fixed by making different enemies react differently to different attacks. But as it stands, all you have to do throughout the game is stand on the outside of a group of enemies and mash the light attack button until everyone falls over. Sometimes you gain control of another character where you need to mash the heavy attack button instead, but it's the same principle. In fact, one of the extra characters takes this to such an extreme that instead of standing on the outside of enemies and mashing a button, you just stand on the outside of enemies and hold the button, causing all of them to fall to sleep so you can pass the area unchallenged. There is one fallback though that every beat-em-up has the chance at, and Shrek the Third does too. Even if the game's not challenging and thinking about its design gets you nowhere, it can still be really satisfying to hit enemies, and that can be the game's point instead. Is it satisfying to hit enemies in Shrek the Third? Sure. Is it satisfying enough that that can carry the entire game? Absolutely not. And this is because the combat system simply isn't varied enough to allow a game based entirely on satisfaction here. And to place the final nail in Shrek the Third's incredibly boring coffin, you can just run straight past most of the enemies in the game. It's not on the same level as Kick-Ass 2, the video game, but oh boy, can you skip most of the encounters. Please don't go play Shrek the Third.